Let me tell you a little bit about the context of the Cold War. I'll share whatever is on my mind, and I'm telling you gradually. And the reason I'm sharing this is because yesterday I was listening to Brett Mike. That Shai Sahab said something really good, so I thought I'd share it with people. If you all have heard it, that's great. The saying history repeats itself, you can see that happening, especially in politics. Understand that international relations are a different matter. When it comes to foreign policy, we focus more on what's happening in the world. So that's the situation with the Cold War. The two powers that started to emerge, if you look back to the First World War, you'll see that Russia had separated. And here they started to come in, and you can understand that Russia was eliminated here. But this is about 1917, there was a rebellion here. And after that, it happened. But all the local people were dominating, wanting that these people shouldn't come here, that the rule of the whites shouldn't come. And the thing is, you should understand that these people kept fighting among themselves for 5 years. From 1917 to 1922, from 17 to 22, nothing happened, and there was a lot of bloodshed. After that, in 22, you should understand that the USSR was formed, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So understand that 15 countries came together in this. But what happened was that after so much internal conflict and struggle, Lenin established the USSR in 1922, running the state on the foundation of communism. But 2 years later, in 1924, he passed away. He couldn't continue. After that, a struggle began over who would succeed him. To put it simply, by the end, Joseph Stalin became the absolute ruler of everything, the master of all black and white, by around 1930. From then on, until 1953, for about 23 years, Joseph Stalin remained in power, and you can't even imagine. Was Hitler more dangerous? Or was it Stalin who killed millions of people? Now, I've explained this from the USSR's perspective, because one side of the Cold War was Stalin, and on the other side, America had also become a major power. After the First World War, the power started to weaken. So understand that a president came here who, believe it or not, stayed for 12 years. His name was Franklin Roosevelt. So understand that he became president in 1933. And after 3 years, he came here. Now, he also wasn't ready to leave. But later, an amendment was made to the law that after 2 terms, no one can stay. So he was there from 1933 to 1945, a total of 12 years. And this one, you could say, stayed for 23 years. Now, it's between these two. Then the matter progressed and the Second World War began, lasting from 1939 to 1945, a total of 6 years. Now, in the Second World War, understand that these two were on the same side, along with the UK and France. And on the opposing side were Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, these people, the Allies won, and those people, Germany, Japan, etc., lost. Now, when it came to dividing things up, the idea was that Germany should never become powerful again. They decided to split it up into pieces and take advantage of it. The Nazis, who were the rulers of Germany, and the top scientists and generals there, after all, the whole world thought they would conquer everything, so everyone wanted a share of them too.
America got some scientists. France wanted its share, and Russia wanted compensation for its losses. So it was decided that they would get compensation, and there was talk of at least $10 billion, which would be about $150 million in today's terms. But everyone agreed on one thing: Germany must not be allowed to become strong again, and its industry should be used for their own benefit.
But this very strength had caused problems for every first in World War I, from 1914 to 1918, and then from 1939 to 1945. Somehow they managed to win. So understand that Germany was divided by these people. On one side was the UK, on another side was France, on another side was America, and the remaining part was given to the USSR. In this way, Russia claimed that it had liberated everyone, so all this would belong to them, and they considered it theirs. Understand that the buffer states remained here. So think of it like this. The division happened, the East came under the influence of the USSR, and the West came under the influence of America and Britain. Now understand it like this. The battle for influence had begun. Back in those days, communism was such an attractive concept that, like a wildfire, if it wasn't contained, when America lost its president in 1945 and Truman came to power, he made it clear that we would have to use the US. We couldn't stop this, but at least keep it at a distance. Now, these people had money and everything else. While the USSR was in ruins, Germany had devastated it. Somehow, though, they managed to win, but their army was large, while their industry was destroyed, agriculture was ruined, everything was in shambles. America, on the other hand, had emerged almost unscathed. Its industries were intact, and it had real supreme naval power, and also the bomb. The USSR didn't even have the atomic bomb yet, but what it did have was an idea that was extremely popular communism. Because of this, people were afraid, and communist parties were forming in every country in Europe. They understood this. And in the third world, whether it was India or other countries of the global south, we were all involved in this matter. Between the USA and the USSR, we leaned more towards the USSR because those people, the West, had a colonial mindset and had kept us enslaved. We wanted freedom. India wanted freedom too. And in 1945, we still hadn't gained independence. So we considered them, the West, our enemy, and thought that the USSR could help us achieve independence. So from this perspective, you can understand that these people were very troubled by the idea of communism. Now, you might say it would be better if I explain a bit about the idea of communism as well. Let me explain it to you simply. Look, first let's talk about what happened in France around 1789 and so on. At that time, whatever issues arose, what were they about? The main issue was that there was a feudal system regarding agriculture and land. There was land, And then there were people working on it on one side, they were farmers, and on the other side, they were laborers. Now that division wasn't done properly, entire harvest would go to the farmer, and those who actually worked on the land would get only a small portion. And then, if there was a sharecropping system, it was like, you have to give this much, whether you want to or not. Because of all these prevailing circumstances, the condition of the laborers remained quite poor, while the landlords were living in opulent luxury. So when things got too bad, people would inevitably mobilize and question why the land was being given to just one person. This was called the feudal system. On one side were the farmers, on the other the laborers, and there would be conflicts between them. Eventually, the land would be divided up little by little among the people. Now, what happened was that in the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution came, machines were invented. Now, work started happening in factories, and people began leaving their villages and moving towards the places where factories were set up. Even in places where no one lived, if a factory was established, 100,000 workers would come there from the villages. So those workers would think, let's bring our families here as well, and families would start coming. If families settled next to the factory, then children would need schools for their education. So schools would come up. If people fell ill, they would need medical facilities. So all kinds of shops and services would open up. If they already existed, they would grow. If not, they would be established. Now, how would this urban problem be solved? In the beginning of the 19th century, when people started getting work in factories, earlier it was that land and the laborers working there, this issue was less significant in the fields. Now, if it's a shoe manufacturing factory or any other, like a textile factory, whatever it is, all the cream, all the profit is taken by the factory owner, the capitalist, the one who invested the money, while the poor workers are toiling away for 12, 16, even 18 hours. And all they get is just enough to barely survive, not even enough for proper rent or a decent home for their children. Just look at the conditions in Dharavi, for example. So here, thinkers like Marx and others started suggesting that just as the workers had earlier fought against the landlords, in the same way, now the workers will have to unite against the capitalists. How will you divide this? The land has already been distributed, but how will you divide the factories? Bit by bit. Here there are machines, labor, and their production. How will you split that? Should you divide it into shares, do this or that? Or should we workers establish our own rule and nationalize all the factories? And then the production should be distributed among everyone. This is the idea and this basis. The rule of the workers. This is communism. Understand this. It won't be Adani's rule. It will be the rule of the people. The factories will belong to the people. The government will be of the people. And under the government, the railways will be under the government. The airways, the roadways. All these things will remain under the government. The banking system, all the factories will be under the people. This is what secularism and democracy mean. Now, whether it's a wealthy person or a laborer, one vote has the same power. There are more laborers in the world, so if this formula is followed, it will spread rapidly like wildfire. Yes, we should be the ones in power. We should have the government. So the capitalists thought, no, we should be in power, and any laws that are made should be in favor of the capitalists. On the other hand, the laborers thought, no, any laws that are made should be in favor of the workers. Whoever comes to power, the laws will be made in their favor. In America, if the capitalists spend money to bring their people into power, then policies are made according to their interests. And if you bring your own people into power, then policies will be made in your favor. For example, if a worker dies while working and there is a labor-friendly government, they will say at least 10 million rupees should be given as compensation. But if the capitalists are in power, they will say, all right, just give 500,000 rupees. If there is a labor-friendly government, then the work hours will be set at 8, 10 or 12 hours, and the salary will be 10,000 or 20,000 rupees, or maybe just 15,000. This is how policies are made. Now, people have found this idea very appealing, so you can imagine that it spread like wildfire everywhere, and parties kept forming all over the place. Then America said that this needs to be contained, otherwise it will take over everything. And if it manages to capture Europe, then we will be pushed out of Europe and we'll have to go across the Atlantic. They started spending money saying, we'll bring this master plan, and in 1947 to 48, they said, we'll give you 10 minus 15 billion for your safety. The others agreed and said, all right, we'll form NATO for you. And thus, the Atlantic Treaty Organization was established in 1949. Now the USSR had one fear. America had the atom bomb. While things were still relatively peaceful, they worried that if a conflict broke out, America would have the upper hand. So the USSR quickly developed its own atom bomb, and by 1949, they too had an atomic bomb ready. So they quickly established NATO and similar organizations. After that, the issue of the Berlin Wall arose. Initially, there was an open conflict, but with the Berlin Wall, things became more explicit. You can see how they divided the area. All the industry in Germany was on one side, and agriculture was on the other. But the capital, Berlin, was located here. Now, Germany itself was divided into 4 parts among the UK, France, America, and the USSR. Similarly, Berlin was also divided into 4 sectors, just like that. So what these people did was change the currency here. These people were rich and these people were poor. So when they faced difficulties, Stalin surrounded Berlin, no planes could come in, no water, everything was blocked, just like how the whole of India was cut off from Bihar. So America, to show its capacity, made it clear that it doesn't abandon those it supports and it stands by them. You should understand that Berlin had been blockaded. So as soon as the blockade was imposed and no goods could be delivered, America responded by using airplanes. Here, supplies were airdropped for a whole year. Do you have any idea how many planes were used for these drops? Supplies were dropped by 227,000 planes. In the end, understand that Even Stalin was embarrassed because people would become so happy. They would celebrate and it became a matter of reputation. So the blockade was lifted. After that, you could say the war began and America said, now we have to contain this. That's when NATO was formed on one side and the bomb appeared on the other. So there was a bit of a balance of power. After that, they gained even more strength. The Communist Party came to power in China. They won in 1949. So you can understand that both the Communists and the Soviets now had support. Now, what did these two do? In North Korea, here's what happened. They started installing governments that favored them. So the person who was pro-communist took control of North Korea. Now America said, hey, this just keeps on spreading. And if this continues, it will become a big problem. Yes, America, with the help of the United Nations, said that Korea, if China takes over, it will save itself. But China has already taken control of the whole area. And America said that as big as this nation is, there's nothing like it. This is China. This small one will remain in the United Nations. It also took the veto power and by bringing the United Nations to its side, took full control. But by the time China arrived, then China managed to turn things around here as well. Then what happened was that the war went on for 3 years. And in the end, the situation remained a draw well for it. Became Communist China or American China. This part became China. This became South Korea. North Korea is over here. The matter, this is a Cold War. This was actually a world war. Both sides kept fighting each other. Like someone burned by milk, they engaged in proxy wars. In the same way, the situation happened in Vietnam. Vietnam, as you know, the whole issue was about Vietnam. This was a matter involving 3 countries, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, what was called Indochina. Here it was under the control of France since 1898, just like that, for a long time. But what happened is that during the Second World War, Japan took control of it. In 1940 to 41, then when Japan lost, France and America handed it back to France. So the local youth stood up and questioned how this could happen. Now, independence was achieved with independence number 2, but the issue remained that the main leader, China and America, were watching, thinking that if he came to power, then their control would be lost and it would become a problem. And somehow, the problem for them was that the USSR was here and North Korea was here, and if it spread here again, it would spread further. And countries like India came in here with their full strength. No, they wouldn't let the people of Nam go, and even those from Nam stood up as well. Now, understand that from 1955-56 up to 1975, for 20 years, the situation remained such that they controlled half, just like South Korea and North Korea, America in the south, and the USSR in the north. Similarly, here too, America was involved. But America carried out so much bombing. The kind of bombing that happened there was nothing like what happened in Gaza or elsewhere. It was on a whole different level. In the end, America had to flee with its tail between its legs. By 1975, the USSR was watching and thinking, the government we want is the one the public there wants to, so why aren't you letting our government come to power? People didn't have the courage, but they managed to form their own governments. In India and Africa, many wanted independence, and America's problem was with its own position. It also wanted to present itself as a champion of freedom, because it too had gained independence from colonial rule in the 1700s, so it couldn't openly support colonialism. Now, the thing is that the USSR started supporting all the freedom struggles happening here. It encouraged revolutions, but if the government that came to power was aligned with the USSR, then the CIA would intervene there, because America couldn't really do much to help with gaining freedom, since it was also against colonialism. But after independence, it wanted the leadership to be in its favor, not in the USSR's favor. If you sided with the USSR, then they would take action, even assassinate major leaders. It was so effective, you can't even imagine the extent of it. There were hundreds of operations, and in this matter, let me tell you, people often ask, and it's something that comes to mind, why is the friendship between America and Israel so strong? So during the Cold War, those who did wrong, America, they remained subservient. Because whose subservience was it? It was to France, to the UK, or to France and others. These were their colonies. You couldn't really protest much because they were powerful and would remain powerful, but in the United Nations, you couldn't say much either. So you had to ultimately give in. Because true freedom was merely just for show, a superficial display. But then, since a powerful and widespread movement had truly started to gain significant momentum, and the general public had decisively taken to the streets in large numbers, and the United States of America had put its considerable diplomatic and economic weight firmly behind this burgeoning movement, what exactly could they realistically do in such a challenging situation? They absolutely had to give in to the demands. So yes, there were indeed more of them, a greater number of people, but what they profoundly wanted was that the dedicated freedom fighters and various other influential figures, if they successfully managed to achieve and secure their independence around the crucial period of 1960-62, many of them, then they should absolutely not turn towards the powerful Soviet Union, towards Moscow for support or alignment. And even in that complex and delicate situation, they couldn't openly go about it in a very blatant or obvious way, because things had already gotten completely out of hand, becoming quite chaotic, and truly dirty work, unpleasant and morally questionable tasks had to be done, like the deliberate shooting down of an aircraft, doing something truly harmful to someone, or brutally crushing them. Who would undertake this truly dirty and morally compromising work? They strategically handed it over. And this individual, Musa, he effectively stirred things up. creating significant unrest and disruption. You could reasonably say that the carefully laid plans of President Kennedy and other key figures ultimately failed because of this unexpected turn of events, and you should clearly understand that he was the one actively doing it, and he was a white-collar type operating within the system. But the main and overriding objective was absolutely not to let the pervasive influence of the USSR grow, not to let it expand its reach, not to let it gain any more ground. That's precisely where the intense Cold War climax was critically important, and global things started to rapidly escalate, and the terrifying nuclear tensions began to significantly increase, creating a very dangerous global atmosphere. So, from one significant perspective, things did indeed move forward and progress. That was the critical Cuban issue, specifically the momentous matter of 1962. What precisely happened in that pivotal year of 1962 was that the club, a significant and influential group, came here. In 1959, he had previously departed, and then tragically, he was killed where, you might ask. In Bolivia, you see a distant and challenging location. So that's the fundamental level of the feed, the underlying information. When the revolution, a profound and transformative event occurred, the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, harbored a strong desire to eliminate him, to remove him from the scene. When they found themselves unable to successfully finish him off, then people, in their desperation and need, tried to seek crucial assistance and support from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. Now, what the United States of America did in its determined efforts to suppress the influence and power of the USSR was to strategically deploy powerful nuclear weapons in various key locations, such as Greece and Turkey, wherever they possessed significant influence and control. They thoroughly filled those places with an abundance of formidable weapons. At the very same time here, within the social and political landscape, in regions like Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, all these distinct and important territories were integral parts of the vast and expansive USSR. The Turkish border is here, and they placed them there. From some perspectives, this also caused tension for them, thinking, you're placing atomic bombs right on our border. Now, the Cubans reached out to the Soviets, and here's the thing, Stalin had passed away in 1953, and Khrushchev had come in, so he said, all right, we'll install missiles and such at your place. America kept intervening because it repeatedly carried out operations, but it always succeeded, since there were at least over 600 attacks. So it was possible that they might launch a direct attack, which is why America placed missiles in Turkey as a deterrent, right next to the Soviet Union, not for themselves, but to keep the Soviets in check. The Soviets, on the other hand, had established their own presence. America wanted to dominate everywhere no other government would be allowed, except America's, whether in Africa, Asia, Europe, or here. If anyone tried to resist, they would be crushed. If anyone wanted freedom, like Afghanistan, they'd have to form a government according to America's wishes. Otherwise, they'd be finished. So these two sides showed courage and installed missiles here. Then what happened was that it was discovered through satellites. The Soviets refused to remove their missiles, and America also refused to back down, saying, if you don't remove yours, we'll install ours right next to you. That's how the situation escalated. And then the question arose, what should be done next? So a naval blockade was immediately put in place. For example, if a ship was sent, that particular vessel would be stopped right there, preventing its further progress. Then what tragically happened was that a reconnaissance pipeline was flown over the area, and it was subsequently shot down. The pilot, unfortunately, was also killed during this incident. Now, take the compelling example of the Russian ship, let's say the lead or head ship. That particular ship was also attacked. And you should fully understand that it was indeed carrying nuclear weapons. The crew had explicit orders that if the ship was destroyed, as a very last resort, they were to launch the nuclear weapons at America. So in this context, what happened was that the ship was attacked, and the situation for those people, USSR's crew, became dire. There were 3 naval officers responsible for making the decision, and out of the 3, 2 were fully determined to go ahead with it. The ship was about to sink, so they thought, let's launch the weapon. There might have been a bit of misunderstanding in that as well. So just understand, it was a matter of just a few minutes of pressing a decision button. If that button had been pressed, then things would have escalated here and so on. But then talks began. And what happened was that one side put forth their conditions. All right, you promise that you will overthrow the government here. That's number 1. Number 2, you won't do this here. And number 3, you will also remove your weapons from Turkey, and I will remove such missiles from here as well. So John Kennedy said, all right, we accept all 3 conditions. But as for the future, we agree that we will not carry out any covert operations here and will not invade. As for Turkey, we agree to remove the equipment from there as well. So if the media finds out, we understand that we won't say anything about this in the media. How will we do this quietly? If it's in the media, it'll look like we aren't removing anything, and you'll have to remove yours. If you agree to this, then there's no issue. Publicly, it will be said that we won, that we gave a warning, the US enjoyed the upper hand, the other side got scared, and the story will go to the US, so the public will be happy, thinking the other side got scared. Outwardly, it will look like a victory for America, but the real victory inside was Russia's. But both sides ended up unhappy. So internally, an agreement was made. And as for us, we ended up with enmity, and you should have kept it here. You see, the issue with the USSR started from one point. What was the reason? The reason was that China and Russia, USSR, began to have disagreements. After Stalin, when Nikita Khrushchev came, he started to signal that Stalin was too rigid, that he was too strict, and he wanted to bring change. But this attitude was not like they didn't want a Stalin-like dictator. That was too much. So then both sides began openly writing against each other, and even a border dispute started between them. By 1969, it seemed like there could be a war between the USSR and China. Seeing this, America took advantage of the situation and extended a hand of friendship towards China. So you can say that from the 1970s to the 1980s, China and America became friends. So after John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson came, and after Johnson, Richard Nixon became president. Nixon was the first to visit China in 1972. There was an understanding that followed, and people said, all right, the Chinese will accept the one China policy. They will not recognize Taiwan, but will recognize China. And in the United Nations, only China will be represented. With this understanding, China and America became friends, and the USSR was left out. The matter continued like this. And after the 1970s, this issue with China was settled. So these people too, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, got scared and thought, let's try to reduce the danger a little bit and ease the tensions. So they signed many treaties among themselves, agreeing not to build more and more weapons, not to make more nuclear arms, and not to conduct nuclear tests. Both sides agreed not to do these things, and also not to do anything that would dangerously damage the environment. This is what it was called. It seemed like they were slowly moving towards friendship. But here, America got a good opportunity. And what was that opportunity? The USSR invaded Afghanistan. So America got hit with two shocks. There was a revolution in Iran in 1979, and the US was ousted from there. And then in Afghanistan, the USSR intervened. So America thought, no, at least let's get the USSR out of here. So what would happen next with oil and all that? They said, now is indeed the opportune and perfect time to take revenge for the deeply impactful Vietnam War. So they meticulously organized and strategically rallied nations like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and explicitly told them, now you people should truly start a real and fervent jihad for us, for our strategic interests. Consequently, extensive and thorough preparations were diligently made in Pakistan. You know, the people in Pakistan used to say that the brave young boys fighting against the formidable USSR here should unequivocally be called freedom fighters because they deeply believed in God, while the Americans, in both English and Marathi, would often characterize the Soviets as godless people. These were certainly not godless people, and you should understand that if someone were to come here, they would undoubtedly be killed and let that happen. Let things continue as they are. Just do some showy work. So in 10 years, it didn't really succeed here in a complete sense, but they did manage to take their revenge. And understand that from 1979 to 1989, the USSR was effectively driven out. So you can clearly see that the significant defeat here became the primary and undeniable reason for the ultimate collapse of the USSR. Now, as a powerful symbol of all this, you can clearly understand that the matter of the Berlin Wall was indeed highly significant. People courageously broke down the Berlin Wall when exactly? In 1989, the formidable Berlin Wall was decisively demolished, and both Germanys were then peacefully united in 1990. Then, in 1991, the vast USSR dramatically split into 15 distinct pieces. It was only then that President Bush announced, now the Cold War has finally finished, and America is the sole supreme power, and America's global dominance truly began. Now, if you carefully look at this entire historical era, America was undeniably the captain, the undisputed leader, and the vice captain. The secondary but still very important figure was this particular one. You see, we absolutely have to change the vice captain as it is a crucial and necessary adjustment for the future direction. We will have to do this. And the one who fought against the SS, now a vice captain could be Israel. And instead of focusing on Europe, we will pay attention to the Middle East. Why? Because this nexus that is forming China, Iran, Russia, and so on, Europe doesn't have the strength to stop it. We can stop it through the Middle East. If Israel does our work, does smart work, just see for yourself. Now, I want to show a little bit. Shai Sahab told you some history, but let me add to that. He made a very good point. Look, Russia has recognized Afghanistan, and the only country in the world that has done so is Russia under Vladimir Putin, which has legally and properly recognized Afghanistan as a country whose rulers are the Taliban. Now, look, history is repeating itself after so many years. It's happening again. Understand this. Earlier, Russia, the USSR had control here, and the US came in saying, we sympathize with you, we'll drive them out. And now, 40 to 50 years later, Russia is saying, we sympathize with you, and America, which had influence here, was driven out in 2021, practically expelled, and their influence was ended. That's why people say that in international policy, in foreign policy, there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies. Only interests matter. What benefits our country? What serves our interests? National leaders look out for the country's benefit, while those in power look out for their own benefit, whether their government will survive or not. Let me add a bit more. In the beginning, the issue was about Muslim rule, about Muslims being a superpower, about enemies and so on. There was a bit of that in the middle, but they couldn't provide good governance, just caused destruction and left. Otherwise, Muslims were indeed the superpower. In 1400 to 1453, they had conquered the world. So you understand that there were 3 Muslim empires in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, everywhere. After that, I want to tell you whose rule came next. After that, 2 superpowers emerged, Spain and Portugal. And when you study history and see which were the colonial powers and where they were, you'll notice that these people, whether they were from America or came here, were from this side. These were the Portuguese and Spanish people at the beginning of the discovery of America. And both of them basically enslaved all of America, made Latin America their colony. The entire continent was enslaved, but the major part was under Portugal and Spain, and most of it was under Spain, with Portugal having a smaller share. Why was it less? Let me explain. Look, up here in Canada and so on, it was under France, and over here it was under the British. This was all in North America, but they came much later. The ones who came in the very beginning were the Spanish and Portuguese. They started fighting among themselves, but then decided there was no need to fight. They divided the land among themselves. They said, look, you take this side and make your colonies here, and I'll make mine over there. That's why, for example, in Brazil and such places, you'll see more people speaking Portuguese because that area was given to them, along with some coastal areas. Then they also moved further, and in this way, the Spanish and Portuguese were spread throughout the region. Later, the British and French arrived and established colonies, for example, in Canada and elsewhere. So in total, there were 6 powers ruling over the American continent, but the largest colony was Spain's, followed by Portugal, then the British and the French. But what actually happened was that the once powerful Spanish and Portuguese empires collapsed. This is, in fact, the real and crucial point to fully understand. And in their place, 2 new and formidable superpowers emerged, who then started fighting intensely against each other. Those dominant powers were Great Britain and France. Otherwise, if you carefully look at the historical context of the 15th and 16th centuries, it should have logically been Spain, because they were predominantly Muslim. And as we well know, scientific research and intellectual flourishing were indeed thriving among Muslim scholars at that particular time. Was it perhaps because of this significant factor? But then, gradually, over a period of 100 or even 200 years, this situation profoundly changed. And here, primarily due to the profound impact of the Industrial Revolution, what truly happened was that these particular people surged significantly ahead in terms of power and influence. What was the reason these people were able to defeat others? The reason was their progress. They made some advancements, especially in industry, and with a little bit of progress, they ventured out into the world. They reached India, and they got it. They acquired it. Now here, there are tribal people with little education. Those who work in agriculture, there is a lot of land here. So what did they get? They got a lot of land, and there were plenty of laborers available here. Now all they had to do was wield a stick.